This presentation is about the 2020-2021 ESSA Compliance Reports. My name is Vivian Smurl, and I work in the Federal Program Compliance Division at the Texas Education Agency. During this presentation, we'll talk about the resources that are available to assist you in completing the compliance reports. We'll talk about how to access the compliance reports and what you'll need to be able to do that. We'll go through the Gun-Free Schools Report, the ESSA Consolidated Compliance Reports, the Rural Low-Income Schools Report, and we'll also share contact information in case you have questions. First, let's go over the resources that will be available to assist you. The following items related to the 2020-2021 compliance reports will be available on the TEA website by the end of May. Mock-ups of the compliance reports documents, instructions for completing the reports, a guide to completing the program implementation questions, and links to this video as well as to individual sections. To find the compliance report resources from the TEA main page, mouse over the Finance and Grants tab and select the Federal Program Compliance link. That will take you to our division homepage, which you might want to bookmark for future reference. If you scroll down, you'll find a link to Division Resources. In the Division Resources box, you'll find links to our ESSA Compliance Report resources, the program webinars and program guides, and our Frequently Asked Questions documents listed by program. Next, we'll cover the kind of permissions and applications you'll need to have in order to access the compliance reports. Please be sure that you use Chrome as your internet browser. The compliance reports have recently been migrated to a new platform that works better with Chrome. Some of the edits that are embedded in the system will not work properly with Internet Explorer. To access the compliance reports, you will have to have a TEAL account. TEAL stands for TEA Login. You can get to the TEAL application through the TEA website. There's a link at the top that says TEAL Login. When you click on that, you'll get a login screen. If you need to request a new account, just click on the Request New User Account. If you have an account already, all you need to do is log in. Once you're inside the TEAL application, check to see if you have eGrants as one of the applications in your list. If eGrants is already listed, check to be sure that you have a role ID that will allow you to complete and submit the compliance reports. Mine says TEA staff, but if you are completing it from the LEA side, you should see either grantee official or grantee manager as the role if you are going to be able to complete and submit the compliance reports. If you don't see eGrants listed on your application list inside TEAL, we'll need to figure out how to add it. You can go to either My Accounts or My Application Account. And what you'll see is a fairly complicated screen that gets kind of crowded, but what you really want, if you're going to request a new account, is to see this link here, sort of in the middle on the left-hand side of the pop-up that says Request New Account. If you click on that button, you'll get a drop-down list of all of the accounts that are available through TEAL. Scroll down and pick eGrants and follow the instructions that come up. It's important to do this early in the process because getting permission through TEAL and access to eGrants can be a 2 to 3 day process depending on how long it takes to get through all of the approvals. Once you have access to eGrants, to get into the application, all you need to do is to click on the role. So you would click on Grantee Official. Once you're inside eGrants, you can access all of the compliance reports from the Compliance Report tab. We're going to talk first about the Gun-Free Schools reports.
The Gun-Free Schools reports are expected to become available on eGrants on May 3, 2021. So in the Compliance Report tab, you will click first on the 2020-2021 PR 6000 Gun-Free Schools District Report. The basic functionality of the Gun-Free Schools report is similar to other compliance reports in eGrants. The buttons at the top will allow you to access a printable version of the report, to exit back to the table of contents, to save the report at any point, which will also run the validations that are associated with the report, and to access the instruction document for the report. To complete the report, simply answer yes or no as to whether the LEA will accept any federal funds in the 2021-2022 school year. You will also indicate whether any students were found to have brought a firearm to school. There is also an optional data field for the LEA to provide any additional relevant information.
To enter the primary contact information for the Gun-Free Schools report, choose a name from the drop-down box under Select Contact. If the name the LEA wishes to enter does not appear here, simply click on Add New Contact to be taken to the schedule that allows the LEA to enter all the new contact information. Once the information is entered on the contact schedule, the LEA can return to the Gun-Free Schools report and select that contact from the drop-down box. To select the authorized official for the Gun-Free Schools report, the LEA should select a contact from the drop-down box, or if it's not there, add the new contact through the contact schedule, save the district report, and then once it has saved successfully, the LEA will be able to choose the Certify and Submit button. If the LEA answers yes on question 2 of the district report, the LEA must also complete a campus report for each campus involved. The LEA can access the campus report from the Compliance Report tab. By clicking on the link to the campus report, the LEA will access a list of all the campuses in the LEA. For example, if I wanted to select campus ABC, I would find that in the list, click it, and it would take me to the campus report. Inside the campus report, the functionality buttons at the top work like on all the other reports, to get a printable version, to exit, to save, or to see instructions. The campus name and campus number will be pre-printed to correspond with the campus that the LEA selected from the drop-down list. There are a couple of things we should mention about the Save button. First, it doesn't become active until a value greater than 0 is entered into the report. And second, The Save button can be used anytime after that to run the edit checks on the data entered. If the edit check finds any errors that must be corrected before submission, they will be listed at the top so that the LEA can see what needs to be fixed. The first section of the campus report is asking for the unduplicated number of students who were involved in an incident with a firearm. So the LEA would complete the report by grade to list the unduplicated number of students. If the same student was involved in more than one incident, that student would simply be counted once in association with the most severe result for that student. In this next section, the LEA will take the unduplicated count of students and divide them into two groups. The first group are students who are not children with disabilities. The second group is students who are children with disabilities. The last section here deals with the unduplicated students who did not fall into any of the categories that were listed above. Still dividing between special ed and not special ed, but counting for students who were not expelled, who received other type of disciplinary action, or who received no disciplinary action. Still divided between special education and not special education. In this section, the LEA is dealing with number of incidents, not students. So by grade level, the LEA would record the number of incidents involving each of these types of weapons. Again, number of incidents, not number of students. The LEA would indicate the primary contact for the campus report by selecting from the drop-down list or by adding a new contact to the drop-down list. The same for the authorized official for the campus report. Either select from the list or add a new contact to that list. The exit, printable version, and save buttons are available at the bottom. And remember that the LEA must certify and submit the report once it's been saved successfully.
It is very important that the LEA submits its gun-free schools reports. If the LEA does not submit its gun-free schools reports, TEA cannot issue a notice of grant award for the LEA's federal grants. The due date for the reports is June 29, 2021. If the reports are not submitted by that date, LEAs will be contacted to come into compliance before NOGAs can be released.
Questions related to the Gun-Free Schools district and campus reports should be sent to essasupport@tea.texas.gov.
In this section, we will discuss the 2020-2021 ESSA Consolidated Compliance Report. The projected availability for the Consolidated Compliance Report is July 30th, 2021. The projected due date for the report is September 30th, 2021. In order to ease the reporting burden on LEAs, TEA has decided to keep the compliance reports as streamlined as possible. This streamlined data collection means that for the 2020-2021 reports, we will only be asking for the data required to complete our federal reports. Some compliance reports will not be collected this year. and most of the program implementation questions will continue to be grayed out for this year. The streamlined data collection also means that program requirements have not gone away. Documentation that the LEA has met the requirements should still be maintained locally. The 2021-2022 validations may select from program implementation questions that were grayed out for this year. We mentioned earlier that there are some reports that will not be collected this year. The PR 3099, Private Nonprofit School Equitable Services, and the PR 1200, Title I Part C, Migrant Education, will not be collected for the 2020-2021 reports. Our expectation is that these reports would become active again for the 2021-2022 compliance report. To access the 2020-2021 ESSA Consolidated Compliance Report in eGrants, go to the Compliance Report tab and select the link for the 2020-2021 ESSA Consolidated Compliance Report. As we mentioned earlier, this link is expected to be available on July 30th, 2021.
The first item that will appear on the table of contents for the compliance report is the GS 2110 for contact information. This is the first section that the LEA is required to complete. The GS 2110 collects contact information for the compliance reports. Part 1 is pre-populated. Part 2 is for the primary and secondary contact for the LEA. The LEA selects the contact from the drop-down list and the information will populate. If the LEA wants to add a contact that's not on the list, they'll simply click on the Add New Contact button to be taken to the schedule that allows for contact information to be entered. This is true for the secondary contact section also. The additional contacts are optional. If the LEA has a program contact that they wish to add, they can simply fill it in here. These additional optional contacts are not listed on the drop-down list. Once the LEA has saved the GS 2110, the other compliance reports will appear on the table of contents. When the LEA has successfully saved each of these compliance reports, a green check will appear to the left. Once all of the compliance reports have been successfully saved, the LEA will be allowed to submit.
The PR 1000 is the compliance report for Title I Part A.
The PR 1000 has the same functionality as other compliance reports. There's a button at the top for the printable version, a button to access the table of contents, a button to save, and a button to access the instructions. As you'll notice on this schedule, several lines have been grayed out as part of our streamlining for this year. The two questions on line 2 and line 7, we are asking for expenditures in these categories because that is what is used to trigger Part 6. So we are asking for expenditures related to eligible private nonprofit school students, not including administration, and services to students residing in local facilities for the neglected. Part 2, we are asking for estimated expenditures for school-wide campus budgets and targeted assistance campus budgets. Part 4 has been grayed out. Part 5, student participation, looks a little bit different than it did last year. We've basically divided the table up into two different parts. Part 5 deals with the public schools. Part 6 will deal with private schools and the local facilities for the neglected. In Part 5, we're only collecting students who are ages 0 to 2 and ages 3 to 5 who are not reported to PEEMS. All of the other ages for public schools, all of the other grade levels for public schools are collected through PEEMS. So on this compliance report, we are only getting ages 0 to 2, 3 to 5 for students who participated in a Title I school-wide program or a targeted assistance program. We are then collecting for those students separated out by gender and by ethnicity, so that when the LEA has completed this section, the totals for each of these will match. 0 is an acceptable entry. In fact, if the LEA has no students, the LEA has to put zeros. There can't be blanks. On Part 6, let me make that a little bit bigger so you guys can see. We're collecting for private nonprofit schools and local facilities for the neglected by grade, ages 0 to 2, 3 to 5, and then kindergarten through grade 12, as well as ungraded for private nonprofit and for local facilities for the neglected. Then those students we are having split out by gender and by ethnicity, with the requirement that each of the sections' totals match. The LEA can't have blanks, so they will have 0 if they have no students.
Part 7, which is the section that includes the program implementation questions for Title I Part A, will be grayed out for the 2020-2021 compliance report. Please be aware that the requirements on which the program implementation questions are based are still in effect. We are simply not including the questions in this year's compliance report. We do expect to reinstate the questions in the compliance report for the 2021-2022 school year.
Part 8 is an optional field that the LEA can use to record any additional data that they need to submit to the agency. Once the PR 1000 is complete, the LEA must hit the Save button to allow the validations to run to ensure that all of the fields have been completed correctly. Once the LEA has successfully saved, there should be a green check mark next to Title I Part A, PR 1000 on the table of contents. The PR 2000 is for Title I Part D. LEAs will complete this schedule for their Part D Subpart 2 program. 2 state agencies receive funds under Subpart 1. The top part of the schedule has the same functionality as the rest of the compliance reports, with a button for the printable version, to return to the table of contents, to save the form, and to access the instructions. In Part 1, the LEA will list the number of programs or facilities and the number of programs and facilities reporting data. For LEAs, the line for the adult corrections will be canceled out. They will also list the average length of stay in terms of days. If for any reason the number of programs and facilities doesn't equal the number of programs and facilities reporting data, the LEA will be asked to explain why not. In Part 2, the LEA will report student participation. In terms of long-term students served, this is the number of students who've been in the facility or program for at least 90 consecutive days. The LEA will also be asked to give an unduplicated count of students served. the student comes in and out of the program more than once, the student would still only be counted once in the unduplicated student count. The unduplicated student count will be subdivided by gender, and the totals for gender, age, and ethnicity must match the total for unduplicated students served. The continuation of Part 2 is where the LEA will list the student numbers by age and by race and ethnicity. Again, the numbers for the totals of each of these groups must match the total number of unduplicated students. Part 3 is asking about academic and vocational outcomes. Number 1 is asking for the number of students who enrolled in their local school district within 90 calendar days of exit. Number 2 and 3 are asking about the number of students who earned a high school equivalency or a high school diploma either in the facility or within 90 days after exit for each type of program. Number 4 through 8 are asking for the number of students who earned high school course credits, enrolled in a high school equivalency program, were accepted and or enrolled in a post-secondary education, enrolled in job training courses, or obtained employment, either while in the facility or within 90 days of exit for each type of program. Part 4 is asking for academic performance of long-term students in reading. The first question is about the number of long-term students who tested below grade level upon entry. The second line is for the number of long-term students with incomplete pre- and post-test information. For those students who have both pre- and post-tests, number 4 through 7 is asking for, in number 4, the number of long-term students who showed negative grade level change. Number 5, students who showed no change. Number 6, students who showed up to 1 full grade level of improvement. And in 7, number of students who showed improvement of more than 1 full grade level. Number 3 automatically adds all of the data in lines 4 through 7. Part 5 is collecting the same information, academic performance of long-term students, but in math. Students who tested below, students with incomplete data, students who had negative grade change, students who showed no change in grade level, students who showed improvement for up to 1 grade level, and students who showed improvement of more than 1 grade level. Again, the numbers in 4 through 7 will be summed up and automatically reported in line 3.
Part 6 is the section that includes the program implementation questions for Title I, Part D. As you can see, this section has been grayed out for the 2020-2021 compliance report, but we do expect to have the questions back in the compliance report for the 2021-2022 school year.
Part 7 is for additional LEA information. It is an optional field. If the LEA has some explanation that they feel they need to give about their data from Part D, this is where they would record that.
The PR 3000 for Title II Part A is relatively short this year. The usual navigation buttons are at the top of the report. In Part 1 of the report, the LEA will answer yes or no to indicate whether or not they participated in the funding transferability program. If yes, the LEA will indicate the percentage of the Title II Part A funds that were redirected to each applicable program, as well as the dollar amount of the redirected funds that were expended for those programs. In Part 2 of the report, the LEA will answer yes or no to indicate whether or not they participated in the Rural Education Achievement Program. If yes, the LEA will indicate the percent of Title II Part A funds that were redirected to each applicable program, as well as the dollar amount of the redirected funds that were expended for those programs. Part 3, the section on Title II Part A expenditures, has been grayed out for the 2020-2021 report. When this section is reinstated for the 21-22 report, we expect that it will be modified to mirror the corresponding section of the Consolidated Federal Grant application. This change will not be made for the 2020-2021 report, but for the following year. Part 4 is the section that includes the program implementation questions for Title II Part A. As you can see, this section has been grayed out for the 2020-2021 compliance report, but we do expect to have the questions back in the compliance report for the 2021-2022 school year.
Part 5 is an optional field for the LEA to enter any additional data that is necessary.
The PR 3002 is for Title III Part A ELA.
At the top of the report, the buttons for printable version, table of contents, save, and access to the instructions have the same functionality as in the other compliance reports. Part 1 is asking for the LEA to list the expenditures that took place for supplemental language instruction educational programs and activities that were implemented by the LEA in the focus areas listed. Part 2 is asking for the expenditures for supplemental parent, family, and community engagement activities that the LEA implemented with Title III Part A funds. Part 3 is asking for the amount that the LEA expended for supplemental professional development activities. In Part 4, the LEA will indicate yes or no whether they offered a newcomer program or a bilingual program. If the LEA offered a bilingual program, they are asked to indicate what types of program models were used. In the third question of Part 4, yes or no, did the LEA offer English as a second language? And if so, was it content-based or pull-out? In Part 5, the LEA will enter the number of certified teachers who are serving in a language instruction education program. The LEA will also enter the estimated number of additional certified teachers that will be needed in the next 5 years. Part 6 has 3 program implementation questions related to Title III Part A. In the first one, did the LEA provide and implement effective parent engagement activities to parents of English learners that were above and beyond other federal programs? Yes, no, or not applicable. In the explanation of compliance status, if the LEA selected yes, the LEA must list the sources of documentation that it has readily available to submit to the agency to document compliance with the requirement. If the LEA said no, the LEA must explain the reason for the non-compliance. And if the LEA selected NA, the LEA must explain why the requirement is not applicable. For the second program implementation question, Did the LEA provide and implement effective family engagement activities to families of English learners that were above and beyond other federal programs? The LEA must answer yes, no, or not applicable. Again, in the explanation of compliance status, if the LEA said yes, the LEA must list the sources of documentation that is readily available to submit to the agency to document compliance with this requirement. If no, the LEA must explain the reason for the noncompliance, and if NA was selected, the LEA must explain why the requirement is not applicable. And in the last program implementation question, did the LEA provide and maintain effective community engagement activities to parents of English learners that were above and beyond other federal programs? Yes, no, or not applicable. And again, the LEA must provide an explanation of the compliance status that was selected. Part 7 provides the LEA with a space to provide additional information if needed.
The PR 3114 is the compliance report for Title III Part A, Immigrant.
The compliance report for Title III Part A, Immigrant, will have the same functionality at the top of the schedule as the other compliance reports in terms of having access to a printable version, to return to the table of contents, to save the schedule, or to access the instruction document. Part 1 is asking for the LEA to enter expenditure amounts in all of the focus areas related to supplemental activities, language instruction, education programs. Part 2 is asking for the expenditure amounts associated with the focus areas for parent, family, and community outreach.
Part 3 is asking the LEA to enter expenditure amounts in each of the focus areas related to supplemental activities, support for personnel.
Part 3, Program Implementation, has 2 questions that the LEA is asked to respond to for Title III Part A, Immigrant. The first question, did the LEA maintain control of Title III Part A immigrant program funds being used to provide equitable services to private school immigrant students and their teachers? Yes, no, or not applicable. Again, if the LEA said yes, the LEA must list the sources of documentation that are readily available to submit to the agency to document compliance with this requirement. If no, the LEA must explain the reason for the noncompliance, and if NA is selected, the LEA must explain why the requirement is not applicable. The second question among the program implementation questions, did the LEA's Title III Part A immigrant-funded programs provide enhanced instructional opportunities for immigrant children and youth? Yes, no, or not applicable. The LEA is asked to explain the compliance status. If yes is selected, the LEA must list the sources of documentation. If no is selected, the LEA must explain the reason for noncompliance. Or if NA is selected, the LEA must explain why the requirement is not applicable. In Part 4, there is additional space that the LEA may use to provide additional information. This is an optional space. PR 3107, Title IV, Part A. The functionality of the buttons at the top of the report are the same as for the other compliance reports, giving the LEA a way to print the report, a way back to the table of contents, a way to save, and a way to access the instructions. The first part of the report for Title IV Part A asks whether the LEA had participated in the funding transferability program with its Title IV Part A funds. If the LEA says no, this part is grayed out. If the LEA says yes, the LEA is asked to give the percentage of the Title IV funding that was redirected under funding transferability and to what program it was directed to. And the LEA is asked to give the amount of funds that were redirected that were actually spent.
In Part 2 of the report, the LEA will answer yes or no to indicate whether or not they participated in the Rural Education Achievement Program. If yes, the LEA will indicate the percentage of Title IV Part A funds that were redirected to each applicable program, as well as the dollar amount of the redirected funds that were expended for those programs. In Part 3, lines 1 through 4 should reflect all of the expenditures for Title IV Part A according to the uses of funds listed. Of the amount the LEA reports for technology in line 4, the LEA will report in line 5 how much was for technology infrastructure. Part 4, which is the section that includes the program implementation questions for Title IV Part A, will be grayed out for the 2020-2021 compliance report. Please be aware that the requirements on which the program implementation questions are based are still in effect. We do expect to reinstate the questions in the compliance report for the 2021-2022 school year.
Part 5 is an additional information box that is optional for Title IV Part A.
The PR 6200 is for the Unsafe School Choice option. The usual navigation buttons are at the top of the report. In Part 1, the LEA will indicate whether any students were transferred from any campus due to the school being identified as persistently dangerous. If yes, how many students transferred to another campus? In Part 2, the LEA indicates whether it had any violent criminal incident on any campus during the 2020-2021 school year. If yes, how many criminal incidents occurred? Did the LEA have any victimized students? If yes, enter the number of victimized students whose parents requested a school transfer and the number of victimized students who were transferred to another campus. If the number of students who were actually transferred is less than the number of students whose parents requested a transfer, the LEA is asked to explain the difference. Also, for those victimized students whose parents requested a transfer, the LEA is asked to provide the number of campuses within the LEA boundaries to which these students transferred, as well as the number of campuses outside the LEA boundaries if students transferred outside the LEA. Part 3 is the section that includes the program implementation questions related to the school choice option. These will be grayed out for the 2020-2021 compliance report. We do expect to reinstate the questions in the compliance report for the 2021-2022 school year.
Part 4 is a space for the LEA to provide any additional data. It is optional. The PR 6400 is for the homeless education program under the McKinney-Vento program. Again, the functionality at the top of the report is the same as for other compliance reports, giving access for the printable version, a way back to the table of contents, a way to save, and a way to access the instructions. The first question is whether the LEA provided services to homeless students through the McKinney-Vento program. The second question deals with unduplicated homeless counts for ages 0 to 2 and ages 3 to 5 who are not enrolled in pre-K or K. We're collecting these ages through the compliance reports because these groups are not reported to PEIMS. The other grade levels are reported to PEIMS, and that's why we don't have to collect them through the compliance reports. So here we get the unduplicated count of number of students who are served in the McKinney-Vento program and the number of unaccompanied youth. The second category of question here for those grade levels or for those ages is an unduplicated number of homeless students by primary nighttime residence. Number of students in shelters, number of students doubled up, number of students unsheltered, and the number of students in hotels or motels. Let's talk a bit about the submission of the reports. It's really important to remember that saving does not equal submission. The table of contents provides access to the individual reports, and it also shows the status of the reports, whether they're not started, whether they're in draft, whether they're completed. The Submit button for the Consolidated Compliance Reports is on the table of contents. After the submission, the Submit button becomes a button to start an amendment if the LEA needs to amend their compliance report. So here is the table of contents, and you see on the left-hand side of the report where the green check marks are. As reports are successfully saved, the green check mark shows that it has passed all of the internal edits. The numbers that are supposed to add up. The LEA hasn't left any blanks. Those are all good to go. So when those compliance reports all show a check, the LEA will be allowed to submit. The PR 6600, the Rural and Low-Income Schools Report, is separate from the Consolidated Compliance Reports. It is listed separately under the Compliance Report tab. Part 1 of the 6600 is automatically populated. Part 2, the LEA contact. The LEA would complete this by selecting the contact from the drop-down box, or if necessary, by adding a new contact to the contact schedule and coming back and selecting that added contact, which would then populate the contact information. This would also be done for the secondary contact for the Rural and Low-Income Schools program. In Part 3, the LEA is asked to indicate how its rural and low-income schools funds were used, whether they was used for Title I Part A, Title II Part A, Title III, Title IV Part A, or parental involvement activities. For Goal 1, increased student academic achievement, Goal 2, decreased dropout rate, or Goal 3, other. And the LEA is asked to estimate expenditures for the goal and program that is indicated. The LEA must have an amount greater than 0 in at least one of these lines. Part 4 is an optional field for the LEA to provide additional information if needed. The LEA is requested to select a contact for its authorized official from the drop-down list, or to add a new contact and then come back and select that contact from the drop-down list. The report has to be saved, and then once it has been successfully saved with no errors, the LEA is allowed to certify and submit it. Contact information for the compliance report questions. Questions that are related to all of the ESSA compliance reports should be sent to ESSA support@tea.texas.gov. Any programmatic questions that are outside the scope of the compliance reports will be forwarded to the appropriate program staff for a response. Thank you very much for your attention during this presentation. We look forward to helping you with your questions.